The elevator was broken. That is where this story begins. Not with a royal motorcade, not with the thunderous applause of world leaders filing into the SEC Armadillo in Glasgow, not with the carefully worded press releases that had been circulating through diplomatic inboxes for 3 weeks prior. It begins with a broken elevator on the 4th floor of a climate summit that had already exceeded its own expectations for chaos, and with a young prince carrying a folder of briefing notes he had read so many times the corners had gone soft. Prince William climbed the stairs. He was already late, not by royal standards, by which a man arriving 4 minutes after the scheduled hour is considered to have arrived with impressive punctuality, but by the standards of the young people waiting in the room at the top of those stairs, who had themselves arrived 40 minutes early, arranged their chairs in a circle rather than theater-style rows, and were currently engaged in a conversation so animated that the 2 palace aides stationed outside the door had exchanged a quiet, uncertain look. The aides had expected nervous young people, rehearsed answers, grateful smiles. They had not expected, as one of them would later tell a colleague, the distinct impression that the meeting had already started without the guest of honor. William heard them before he saw them. A girl's voice, rapid and precise, cutting through the murmur of the building. The problem isn't the technology. The technology exists. The problem is that nobody believes the technology exists. A pause. Then laughter, not polite laughter, not the rehearsed kind that fills conference rooms when a moderator makes a weak joke, but the real kind, sudden and warm and slightly too loud for the space. William stopped outside the door for exactly 3 seconds. His aide, James Holt, watched him do it and said nothing. Then William opened the door. The room was smaller than anyone had planned for. The original venue, a sleek briefing suite on the 2nd floor with a long mahogany table and a projection screen displaying the Earthshot Prize logo in dignified blue and green, had been reassigned that morning to a last-minute bilateral between 2 heads of state whose names would dominate the following day's headlines. The replacement room had a window that wouldn't close all the way, a radiator that produced heat in philosophical rather than practical quantities, and 12 chairs arranged in a circle by young people who had decided, without asking anyone's permission, that sitting in rows felt wrong for what they wanted to talk about. There were 15 young innovators in that room. They came from 13 countries. The oldest was 26. The youngest was 15. Between them, they had developed solutions to problems that had defeated governments, stumped research institutions, and generated decades of expensive international conferences producing documents that were read carefully by very few people and implemented faithfully by fewer still. They had done this largely without funding, frequently without encouragement, and in several cases without reliable access to the internet. William looked at the circle of chairs. He looked at his briefing notes, 12 pages, color-coded by category, annotated in 3 different inks. He looked at James, who offered the expression of a man who has learned that his most useful professional skill is the ability to communicate nothing whatsoever with his face. Then, William set the briefing notes down on the windowsill next to the radiator that wasn't working, pulled a chair into the circle, and sat down. "Right," he said, "tell me what's actually going on." Nobody had written that line for him. It was not in any of the 12 color-coded pages. It was possibly the most useful thing he would say all week, and he said it before the meeting had officially begun, before the palace photographer had positioned himself in the corner, before the junior aide had managed to locate and distribute the printed agenda that nobody in the circle would ever read. The girl who had been speaking when he entered, Venetia Umashankar, 15 years old from Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu, India, looked at him with the calm, evaluating expression of someone deciding whether a question is worth answering seriously. She had, in the preceding 3 years, presented her solar-powered ironing cart to the United Nations, won the Children's Climate Prize, been named a Young Champion of the Earth by UNEP, and been selected as an Earthshot Prize finalist. She was accustomed to adults asking her questions. She had developed, through practice, an efficient method for determining which adults were genuinely curious and which were performing curiosity for an audience. She decided, in approximately 2 seconds, that Prince William was genuinely curious. "The farmers are burning their crops," she said, "because nobody has given them a better option. The street vendors are using charcoal irons because solar ones don't exist yet at the price they can afford. The problem isn't awareness. Everyone is aware. The problem is access." She paused. "That's what I'm working on. That's what most of us in this room are working on. Not the problem, the access." William nodded slowly. He did not write anything down. He did not redirect the conversation toward a talking point. He said, "How close are you?" And the meeting, the real meeting, the one that nobody had scheduled, began. What happened in the next 90 minutes was not what the Palace Communications team had anticipated when they drafted the event brief 3 weeks earlier. The brief had described the meeting as an opportunity for Prince William to engage with and inspire the next generation of climate innovators, communicating the Earthshot vision and encouraging scaled ambition across the cohort. It was a sentence written by someone who had never sat in a room with these particular young people, and it showed. William was not required to inspire anyone. They arrived already inspired, burning with it, in some cases visibly uncomfortable containing it in a room this small. What he was required to do, and what he turned out to be surprisingly good at, was listen in a way that made people feel their work was genuinely landing somewhere. He had a habit, noticed by at least 3 of the young innovators, and mentioned by 2 of them in interviews given months later, of leaning forward very slightly when something caught his attention, and going very still, as though conserving energy for understanding. He leaned forward a great deal that afternoon. The introductions had begun informally, without a moderator, without name placards, without the awkward ritual of going around the circle alphabetically. They began because Venetia had finished speaking and the young man sitting 2 chairs to her left had something to add, and adding it seemed more important than waiting for the correct procedural moment. His name was Eshrat Waris. He was 24 years old. He was from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and he had built from a starting position of almost nothing an energy exchange network that allowed people in off-grid communities to sell excess solar energy to their neighbors. A peer-to-peer electricity market operating in places where the national grid had never reached, and in several cases, had never intended to reach. The grid treats rural Bangladesh like a problem to be solved eventually, Eshrat said. He had the manner of someone who had given this explanation many times and had refined it through repetition to its irreducible core. We stopped waiting for eventually. We built a parallel system, small, local, owned by the people using it. It works because nobody is waiting for permission. William asked, "What does scale look like for this? What does it look like in 10 years? 10,000 communities, Eshrat said without hesitation. Maybe more. The model replicates itself. You don't need to rebuild it every time. You need people to believe it can work before they've seen it work. That's the hard part." He paused. "That's what we need from rooms like this one." It was not a subtle point. William received it without flinching. Across the circle, a young woman named Michaela Herrmann, 23, from Stuttgart, Germany, though she had spent the previous 2 years living out of a backpack across 6 countries conducting field research, was waiting with the patience of someone who has learned that the best moments in conversations arrive only if you don't rush toward them. Michaela had developed a biodegradable packaging material made entirely from agricultural byproducts. Specifically, from the husks and stalks left behind after harvests in regions where those byproducts were currently being burned, contributing to the same air quality crisis that Venetia's solar iron was working to address from a different angle. "We're solving the same problem from different ends," Venetia said, nodding at Michaela with the recognition of someone encountering a mirror for the first time. "That's what this room is," Michaela said. "Different ends of the same problem." William looked around the circle. He was beginning to understand something about the architecture of what he was sitting inside. From Lagos, Nigeria, there was Oluwaseun Adebanjo, 21, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are thinking several steps ahead of the conversation. Oluwaseun had developed a mobile application that aggregated real-time air quality data from low-cost sensors distributed across urban neighborhoods. Sensors built and maintained not by governments or research institutions, but by local community volunteers who had been trained in a weekend workshop and compensated not in money, but in access to the data their own neighborhood was generating. The application had been downloaded 340,000 times. It had been used to successfully challenge 3 industrial polluters in Nigerian courts. It had been built, initially, on a second-hand laptop purchased with savings from 18 months of part-time work, in a bedroom shared with 2 younger siblings. The data existed, Oluwaseun said. It was in the air, literally. We just needed a way to collect it and give it back to the people it belonged to. William said, the people it belonged to. The people breathing it, Oluwaseun said. The journalist from The Guardian who had been permitted into the room, a concession negotiated through 3 rounds of email correspondence with the Palace Press Office, stopped writing in her notebook at this point. She would explain later that she had stopped not because nothing was happening, but because too much was happening simultaneously, and she did not want to miss any of it by looking down at her page. From Sao Paulo, Brazil, there was Rafael Mendes, 26, the oldest person in the circle apart from William and the 2 aides standing near the door, and possessed of a manner that suggested he had been 26 for quite some time and had used the time well. Rafael had spent 4 years developing a reforestation methodology that combined satellite monitoring with community-based planting programs, training local people not merely to plant trees, but to understand, track, and report on forest recovery in ways that generated the kind of granular, verifiable data that carbon credit markets required, but almost never received from projects operating at the community level. The problem with most reforestation, Rafael said, is that it gets planted and forgotten. A tree goes in the ground, a number goes in a spreadsheet, and nobody checks whether the tree is still there in 5 years. Our communities check. They check because they own the data. They check because their income depends on the forest surviving. You align the incentives correctly and people do remarkable things. What does correctly mean? William asked. In practice, specifically. Rafael smiled, the smile of a man who has waited a long time for someone to ask the follow-up question. It means the community decides, not us, not the government, not the carbon market. We provide the tools and the training. They decide what gets planted, where, and how the income gets distributed. We've been doing this for 4 years, and I have never once had to argue with a community about whether protecting their forest was a good idea. I have had to argue with funding bodies about it constantly. A sound moved around the circle, not quite laughter, not quite recognition, something between the two. From Nairobi, Kenya, there was Amara Osai, 20, studying environmental engineering at the University of Nairobi, while simultaneously running a social enterprise that had already reached 47 schools across 3 East African countries. Amara had developed a water filtration system constructed from locally available materials that could be assembled in under 3 hours by a person with no engineering background, maintained using components available in any rural market, and powered entirely by gravity. It produced water that met drinking standards. It cost, at materials, the equivalent of 12 British pounds. William stared at him for a moment. 12 pounds, he said. 12 pounds, Amara confirmed pleasantly. The expensive part was figuring out the cheap part. From Seoul, South Korea, there was Jaewon Park, 22, who had the economical conversational style of someone who believes that every unnecessary word is a small theft from the listener's time. Jaiwan had developed a seaweed-based biofuel that could be produced in coastal communities using existing fishing infrastructure, required no arable land, consumed carbon dioxide during growth rather than producing it, and could be processed into usable fuel using equipment that cost, in total, less than a mid-range family car. The yield numbers are not yet where they need to be, Jaiwan said before anyone could ask. I know the yield numbers. I think about the yield numbers every day, but the trajectory is correct, and the trajectory is what matters at this stage. What do you need? William asked. A larger pilot site, access to a coastline with the right temperature profile, and approximately 8 months without anyone telling me it can't be done. Jaiwan paused. The last one is harder to source than the first two. More laughter, warmer this time. The room was losing its formality the way a room loses cold, gradually, unevenly, until you notice that it's gone. From Auckland, New Zealand, there was Aroha Ngata, 24, who had grown up on a coastline that was measurably, documentably, visibly closer to her childhood home than it had been when she was born, and who had responded to this fact not with despair, but with what she described, matter-of-factly, as productive fury. Aroha had developed a community-led coastal monitoring program that combined indigenous Maori ecological knowledge with contemporary sensor technology, a methodology that had produced more accurate and more locally actionable data about coastal erosion than any government-commissioned study conducted in the same region over the previous 15 years. Our elders knew things about this coastline that took researchers 20 years to rediscover, Aroha said. We stopped treating that knowledge as a supplement to the real science. We started treating it as the foundation. The data improved immediately. William said quietly, "That's not a small thing." "No," Aroha agreed, "it isn't." The room had been talking for 53 minutes. Outside, the COP26 main stage was hosting a panel discussion on long-term net zero commitments that had attracted 400 attendees, 2 television cameras, and a simultaneous translation service operating in 7 languages. Inside the room with the broken radiator and the window that wouldn't close all the way, something else entirely was happening. Something that had no panel, no moderator, no simultaneous translation, and an audience of exactly 2 people who had not built anything. William and the Guardian journalist who had stopped writing 40 minutes ago. Venetia had been waiting. Not impatiently, she was not, by nature or by disposition, an impatient person. Impatience implied that the present moment was insufficient, and Venetia had trained herself, through years of working on problems that did not resolve quickly, to find sufficiency in the present moment while simultaneously working to change it. But she had something more to say, and she had been holding it since William first walked through the door, and she had been watching the room build toward the right temperature for it. She waited until Jaiwan finished speaking. She waited for the laughter about the 8 months without being told it couldn't be done to settle. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" William looked at her. "Of course." "Why did you start the Earthshot Prize?" She said it simply, without challenge, without agenda. A genuine question from a 15-year-old who wanted a genuine answer. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a speaker to begin, but the active quiet of people choosing to stop doing everything else so that something important could be heard clearly. William took a moment. Not the diplomatic moment of a person composing a safe answer, but the real moment of a person deciding how honestly to answer a question that had reached somewhere genuine. "Because I was losing faith," he said. Nobody in the circle moved. "I had been to enough summits," he continued, "read enough reports, sat in enough rooms with enough very intelligent, very well-intentioned people who were producing very thorough analyses of exactly how bad things were going to become. And somewhere in all of that, in all the data and the projections and the carefully modeled scenarios, I stopped being able to see a way through." He paused. The prize was, if I'm being completely honest, as much for me as for anyone else. I needed to see whether the solutions actually existed, whether people were actually working on them, whether there was something on the other side of all the analysis. Venetia nodded. She had the expression of someone whose hypothesis had been confirmed. And she said, "And then I started meeting people like you," William said. "So." It was a small word, 3 letters. It carried in that particular room on that particular afternoon the weight of a conclusion that William had been building toward for 3 years and had only just in this moment found the right container for. The Guardian journalist would later describe the next 60 seconds as the most important minute of COP26 that nobody was reporting on. Mikaela Herman, who had been listening with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes moving around the circle, said, "I think that's the problem, though. Not just for you. For most people. The analysis creates despair, and the solutions are invisible because they're small and distributed and happening in places that aren't on the main stage." "That's what the prize is trying to fix," William said. "Is it working?" Eshret asked, not unkindly, with the genuine curiosity of someone who needed an accurate answer. William looked around the room. At Amara, who had built a 12-pound water filter that worked. At Raphael, whose communities were checking on their trees every week because the trees were theirs. At Aroha, who had stood on a coastline that was disappearing and built something to measure it precisely so that no one could pretend it wasn't happening. At Aluwason, who had given 340,000 people access to the air quality data that was, quite literally, their air. At Venetia, 15 years old, who had looked at millions of street vendors burning charcoal and thought, "There is a better option, and I will build it." "I think it's working," William said. "I think this room is what working looks like." What happened next was not dramatic. There was no applause. Nobody stood up. The radiator continued to produce heat in its philosophical, non-committal way. The window continued to admit a thin thread of Glasgow November air. But something shifted in the room, some calculus of who was receiving and who was giving, and everyone present felt it, and nobody remarked upon it, because there are moments that survive only if you don't put them into words too quickly. The adults had come to mentor the children. The children had, in the space of 58 minutes, reminded the adults what believing in something actually felt like. This is not an unusual story. It is, in fact, one of the oldest stories humans tell. The young show the old what the old have forgotten. The old, if they are paying attention, let it happen. What made this particular instance of this ancient story unusual was the location. A climate summit attended by nearly 200 world leaders at a moment of genuine civilizational consequence. And the subject matter, the survival of conditions suitable for human life on the planet's surface. And the specific quality of attention that one particular adult in a circle of chairs was willing to bring to a room full of young people who had not asked for his permission to solve the world's problems, and had not, in several notable cases, waited for it. William stood. Not abruptly, he rose the way a person rises when they have made a decision, and the decision has made them slightly taller. The circle of young people watched him. The Guardian journalist, who had been so still for so long that one of the palace aides had briefly wondered whether she had fallen asleep, became very alert. James Holt, who had been standing near the door for 90 minutes with the professional composure of a man who had stood near many doors through many meetings, and had learned to tell the important ones from the ordinary ones, straightened slightly. "I want to ask you all something," William said, "and I want real answers, not the answers that are appropriate for a meeting with me, the other kind." He looked around the circle. 15 young people from 13 countries looked back at him with the expressions of people who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. "If you were standing where I am standing," William said, "what would you do tomorrow? Not the policy, not the framework, not the commitment mechanism. What would you actually do tomorrow that would make a difference?" Silence. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people rapidly sorting through everything they had to say to find the thing that was most true. Eshrat spoke first. He had the quality, valuable in any room, rare in most of them, of being able to compress a large idea into a small sentence without losing anything important in the compression. "I would call the 10 most powerful energy companies in the world," Eshrat said, "and I would tell them that the off-grid communities they've been ignoring for 50 years have already built the infrastructure. All they need to do is connect to it instead of replacing it. The technology isn't the barrier. The pride is." William nodded. He was not taking notes. He was memorizing. Oluwaseun spoke without raising his hand. Nobody in this circle had raised a hand since the first 5 minutes, when the habit had simply dissolved in the informality of what the meeting had become. "Fund the sensors," he said. "Not the studies, not the reports. The actual physical sensors in the actual physical communities, maintained by actual community members who are paid a living wage to maintain them. The data problem is solved the moment you fund the people closest to the data." Amara leaned forward. "Procurement," he said. "If every government hospital, every government school, every government building in a water-stressed region was required to install a gravity-fed filtration system meeting WHO standards, the manufacturing scale would drop the unit cost to under £5 within 3 years. It's a procurement decision. That's all it is." Raphael said, "Stop funding reforestation projects. Start funding reforestation communities. The project ends when the money runs out. The community continues." Mikola said, "Make biodegradable packaging the default, not the premium. Right now it costs more because it scales less. It scales less because nobody requires it. Require it and the cost drops. It's a policy decision that looks like a market decision." Jaiwan said, "Pilot sites, coastlines, 8 months. A pause. Also, stop telling people things can't be done before you've asked the people who are doing them." Aroha said, "Talk to the people who have been watching their environments change for generations, not as a consultation exercise, as the primary data source. They have been collecting information you need for longer than your monitoring systems have existed." Venetia spoke last. She spoke with the quiet, precise confidence of someone who has learned, through the particular education of being 15 years old in rooms full of adults who initially do not take you seriously, and then suddenly do, that clarity is more persuasive than volume. "Build the supply chains first," she said. "Every solution in this room is stuck at the same bottleneck. The idea works, the prototype works, the pilot works, and then there is nowhere to manufacture it at scale, no distribution network to move it, no procurement system to buy it. We are 15 people in a room with 15 solutions that all need the same infrastructure. Build the infrastructure once and all 15 of us can scale." William was quiet for a moment after she finished. "That's it," he said. "That's the strategy." "Yes," Venetia said, "we know." There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. Then William laughed, a real laugh, unprepared, surprised out of him, and the room laughed with him, and even James Holt, near the door, permitted himself a small smile before restoring his professional expression. The answers these 15 young people had given in under 8 minutes of total speaking time were not, individually, unknown to the world. Procurement reform had been discussed in policy papers. Supply chain infrastructure had featured in think tank reports. Community ownership of data had been the subject of academic conferences. None of this was new information precisely. What was new was its compression. 15 people, 15 real solutions, 8 minutes, one coherent architecture. What was new was that it had been generated not by a task force or a working group or a commission study, but by a circle of chairs in a room where the radiator didn't work. By young people who had been given the simple and unusual gift of being asked a real question by someone who genuinely wanted the answer. The Guardian journalist had started writing again. She would fill 6 pages in the next 8 minutes. She would describe it later as the most efficient strategy session she had ever witnessed. which was saying something, because she had spent 15 years covering international climate negotiations, and efficiency was not a quality she had frequently encountered in that context. Outside the room, COP26 continued. Commitments were made and recorded. Targets were announced and debated. Documents were circulated and signed. The machinery of international climate governance operated with its characteristic combination of genuine urgency and structural slowness, and the people operating it were, almost without exception, trying their best within systems that had been built for a different era and were being asked now to move at a speed they had not been designed for. Inside the room, something simpler and more difficult was happening. 15 young people and one prince were discovering, in real time, that they agreed on what needed to be done, not in the abstract, not in principle, not subject to further consultation, but concretely, specifically, tomorrow. The question was never whether the solutions existed. Amara had proved that in 12 pounds of locally available materials. The question was whether the people with the power to scale those solutions were paying attention. William had climbed a broken staircase to a room with a malfunctioning radiator and a circle of chairs, and found his answer. The meeting ended without ceremony. There was no formal closing, no rapporteur summarizing key outcomes, no action items distributed via email to a list of stakeholders. One of the palace aides checked his watch at 4:47 p.m. and said, very quietly, to James Holt, that the next commitment was in 11 minutes, and James Holt conveyed this information to William with a look rather than a sentence, and William received it with a nod and stood. He shook hands around the circle, not the efficient, rhythmic handshake of a public figure working through a receiving line, but the deliberate handshake of a person who has been genuinely changed by an encounter and wants the people responsible for that change to know it. He held Amara's hand an extra second and said, "The expensive part was figuring out the cheap part. I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time." He said to Raphael, "Community, not project. I'm writing that down." He said to Jaiwan, "I'll see what I can do about the coastline." He said to Aroha, "I'd like to know more about the methodology, properly. Can we arrange that?" He said to Aluwason, "The air belongs to the people breathing it. I'll be quoting that." He stopped in front of Venetia last. She was 15 years old and she had come from Tamil Nadu, India, to a room in Glasgow with a broken radiator. And she had, in the preceding 97 minutes, done something that none of the 12 color-coded pages on the windowsill had managed to do. She had made the future feel inhabitable. "Build the infrastructure once," William said. Venetia nodded. "I'm going to try," he said. "Not I will endeavor, not we remain committed. I'm going to try." 3 words in the first person, no diplomatic cushioning, offered to a 15-year-old as a genuine personal promise. Venetia said, "Good." William walked to the door. He collected his briefing notes from the windowsill, the 12 color-coded pages with the soft corners, and he looked at them for a moment, and then he set them back down. He would not need them for what came next. What came next was not covered in any brief that had been prepared for him. What came next was something he would have to navigate without notes, using only the map that 97 minutes in a circle of chairs had given him. A map drawn by 15 young people who had looked at the same broken world as everyone else and had, instead of accepting the brokenness, begun, quietly and without waiting for permission, to fix it. James held the door. William walked through it. The palace photographer, who had been stationed in the corner of the room for the preceding hour and 37 minutes, had taken 214 photographs. He would later identify the image he considered most significant. Not William shaking hands, not William laughing, not William leaning forward with the focused stillness that had become, in the course of that afternoon, the room's unofficial posture. The most significant photograph was taken at the moment William set his briefing notes back down on the windowsill. In it, his face is turned slightly away from the camera. His expression is unreadable in the way that expressions are unreadable when they are entirely, rather than partially, honest. His hands, having released the notes, are open and empty at his sides. The cameras outside the building captured him leaving. He walked down the stairs, the elevator was still broken, and into the Glasgow November air with the manner of a man who has just been given more to carry and found, to his surprise, that he felt lighter for it. The journalists who had been waiting outside with their questions about the morning's ministerial sessions and the afternoon's commitment announcements looked at him and noted, without being able to precisely account for it, that something was different. He looked. One of them would write in her notebook, more decided. Not happier, not relieved, decided. He had gone in with 12 pages of notes. He had come out with a strategy. The difference between the two was the difference between information and understanding, and that difference had been provided entirely by 15 young people in a room that had not been properly heated. Inside, the door had barely closed before the circle reformed. Not because anyone asked it to, not because there was an agenda item requiring it, but because the conversation they had been having before William arrived, the conversation he had walked into, mid-sentence with his soft-cornered briefing notes, had not, in fact, been completed. It had been interrupted by 97 minutes of something important. Now it continued. Venetia was speaking again, the same voice, rapid and precise, that William had heard through the door. The same argument, refined now by the afternoon's discussion, sharper and better evidence than it had been 97 minutes ago. The problem isn't the technology. The technology exists. The problem is that nobody believes the technology exists. She paused. Then, but I think someone in this room might believe it now. Amara was on his laptop, composing an email to a manufacturing contact in Nairobi. Aroha was on her phone, sending a voice message to her research partner in Auckland about what William had said about the methodology. Rafael was in a quiet corner of the room, speaking in Portuguese to someone in Sao Paulo, gesturing with his free hand in the way that people gesture when they are describing something they can see very clearly. Aluwason had opened a document and was writing rapidly, the focused, absorbed writing of a person capturing something before it evaporates. Jaiwan was sitting with her eyes closed and her hands flat on her knees, thinking about yield numbers. She thought about yield numbers a lot. She had calculated, through careful and frequently revised modeling, that if the yield numbers improved by a factor of 2.3, seaweed biofuel became economically competitive with petroleum without any subsidy. The factor of 2.3 was not, in her assessment, an unreasonable target. It was a hard target. It was an 8 months without being told it couldn't be done target. It was not an impossible target. Jaiwan did not, as a professional orientation, concern herself with impossible targets. She concerned herself with hard ones. Eshret was reading something on his phone, a message from his team in Dhaka, where it was late evening, and where the energy exchange network that he had built without asking anyone's permission was continuing to operate, transferring small amounts of excess solar energy between neighboring households in off-grid communities, household by household, quietly and reliably, in a system so local and so human-scaled that it barely registered in any of the databases tracking the global energy transition, and which was, for precisely that reason, doing something that the global energy transition had so far failed to do, working. Mikola had found in her bag a small sample of the biodegradable packaging material she had been developing for 3 years. She set it on the chair next to her and looked at it. It was approximately the size of a paperback book. It was made from barley husks and corn stalks and a binding agent derived from cassava starch. It would, if placed in a compost environment, decompose completely within 6 weeks, leaving nothing behind. It looked slightly rough. It looked slightly imperfect. It looked like the beginning of something. She picked it up and put it back in her bag and returned to her laptop and her work, which was the work of making this small, imperfect beginning into something that could be everywhere. Outside, the COP26 climate summit continued. It would run for another 9 days. It would produce a document called the Glasgow Climate Pact. It would be described, depending on who was describing it, as a historic step forward, a missed opportunity, a pragmatic compromise, a dangerous delay, or an important signal. History would, in time, render its verdict on these assessments, as history renders its verdict on all assessments, slowly, without sentiment, and with reference only to what actually happened next. What actually happened next in the room with the broken radiator and the circle of chairs. Nothing stopped. Nobody went home. Nobody declared the work done. 15 young people from 13 countries opened their laptops and their notebooks and their WhatsApp groups spanning 6 continents and continued the work they had been doing before William walked through the door, and would continue after he walked out of it, and would continue tomorrow, and the day after. Not because anyone had given them permission to continue, but because the problems were real and the solutions existed, and the infrastructure needed to be built, and they had not. In any of their various calculations, included in their models a variable for waiting to be told they could begin. The door stayed closed. The work continued. Nobody needed to give a closing speech, because this was not, in any meaningful sense, a close. 6 days after the meeting in the room with the broken radiator, Prince William stood on the main stage of COP26 in front of an audience of 3,000 people and 12 television cameras, and a simultaneous translation service operating in 9 languages. And he said something that was not in any of the briefings he had received, and was not on any of the prepared remarks that had been reviewed and approved through the relevant channels, and was not the kind of sentence that emerges from 12 color-coded pages with soft corners. He said, "The solutions exist. The people building them are younger than you expect, working in places further from the main stage than you think, and they are not waiting for permission. Our job, all of our jobs, is not to inspire them. It is to get out of their way, and then to build the infrastructure that lets them scale." He paused. "I know this," he said, "because I spent an afternoon in a room with 15 of them, and they were kind enough to explain it to me." In the room with the broken radiator, which had by then been reassigned to a bilateral meeting between 2 trade ministers whose names would not, particularly, endure, Venetia Umashankar was on a video call with her parents in Tamil Nadu. She was telling them about the afternoon. Her mother asked whether the prince had been nice. Venetia considered this question with the same evaluating attention she brought to all questions. "He listened," she said, "really listened." Her mother said that was good. Venetia agreed that it was good. Then she ended the call and returned to her work, because the solar ironing carts did not design themselves, and the supply chain infrastructure did not build itself, and there were, at conservative estimate, millions of street vendors in the world who were still using charcoal, and the distance between now and fixed was not a distance that closed by itself. It closed because people closed it. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. The room shouldn't have existed. The elevator was broken. The radiator didn't work. A 15-year-old from Tamil Nadu sat in a circle of chairs with a prince who had stopped believing in the future, and in 97 minutes, without a single PowerPoint slide or color-coded briefing document, she and 14 others gave it back to him. Then they went back to work.